All right, we are live. Let's try this one more time. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Jamal Thomas Morning Show, and we are going to get this boat rolling. There was a difficulty with YouTube. Apparently, there was some kind of error or flaw, and it pointed out that basically that they couldn't stream to YouTube at the moment. But it should be working now. And from my point of view, it seems like everything is on. All right, I am joined with Sarah Bils. Sarah Bils is a former U.S. Navy veteran, current editor for D&D Geopolitics. Now, is that correct, Sarah?
Yes, that's correct. Thanks for having
Excellent.
me.
No, thank you for joining me. And you can hear me all right. No issues
Yes,
with sound or
loud,
anything like that.
loud and clear.
Perfect. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I am good. Given the circumstances, I'm actually really good. I haven't been home for 24 hours yet, but I feel great. So,
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I saw the thing where you were like, oh God, this is live. I'm going to have to pull something out of my suitcase. Let me put on makeup. You look
not even that
beautiful, by
bad.
the way,
Thank you so
and
much.
you're too young to be wearing makeup or needing to wear makeup. But thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
let's start at the beginning. What did you think of Donald Trump's win?
I expected it, so I wasn't super shocked. I really don't feel like I had too much of a horse in this race. I don't feel like I had too much of a desire either way. I kind of tried to, I'm so much more international than I am domestic. So I usually try to gauge this sort of stuff off of how the international community is feeling. And they were, I don't want to say that they were ambivalent as much as they were confused, that they were like, we don't know who would even be better for us. And I'm at the same sense going, neither do I. So I didn't feel like I had much of an opinion. I don't get too involved with domestic politics because when you're a pro-Russia commentator, you don't want it to look like you're trying to influence United States stuff too much. So
See, that's the wild part about that, right? So, I worked on Radio Sputnik, 105.5 FM for the last 5 years. And, there's this idea that if you're working for a Russian network, that you're talking to Vladimir Putin and that he's telling you what to say. Now, this is nonsense. You have people who are on the right and who are on the left on that network. I mean, it runs across the entire political gambit. If there is any, I would say, main thrust of people who they hire, it's probably people who are just anti-war.
yeah,
It's not, pro-Russian per se. I would argue I'm pro-American. I hate these wars. I hate the way that we are functioning around the world, and I don't necessarily think it's our best interests. That's not a Russian position. That's just me being a person. That was one of the most frustrating aspects of working for it, because the moment you give an opinion, they'll say, well, the Russians are talking about this. It's like,
right.
no, they're not. It's like, no,
And
they're not.
I'm really the only American on the team. So I think for us, it was just better for us to stay out of it because I really didn't feel very connected to the race anyway. But
Yeah.
I wasn't shocked given the climate. I watched the Twitter wars and the social media kind of campaigns from afar and was so I wasn't shocked that Donald Trump won. We have a very large population that's very disaffected or feels like they're not included, especially when it comes with the liberals, the
Yeah.
Democrats. So I think that there was a lot of backlash and a big boomerang effect. Will the Democrats learn? Probably not. We can get into that later. But I don't feel hopeful and I don't feel hopeless. I'm watching the cabinet picks and I'm starting to get concerned. But I don't know that I would feel much different had the other side won.
Yeah, the cabinet picks are freaking me out.
Yeah.
But I agree with you on that, right? Is there that much of a difference between Blinken versus Marco Rubio? Not really.
Not in terms of evil or like maleficence. Maybe they're just their places of interest. Like now now we're watching because I'm trying to keep like my people sort of informed because they're obviously not very domestic and even people that live in America might not know all of these people's hidden interests. But I'm like, okay, well now they're like, well, Marco Rubio's not as bad as blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, we're just going to switch the interests. Now we'll go to Latin and South America. So the evil is the same. The funding is the same. It's just that where are Marco Rubio's kind of vendettas? They're in Cuba and Latin America. So you see the difference in people who are kind of rejoicing these picks, and then you have
Mhm.
to see why they're rejoicing these sorts of picks. And they're sort of these, I don't know how controversial I can get on your show, but there's sort of these people who were part of the coups in their home countries and then were
Yeah.
ousted and had to leave and flee to America. And now they're like, Marco Rubio's getting back in office. And you're like, why
Yeah.
are you cheering? You have to look
It's
into that.
yeah, it's wild. I mean, Donald Trump got $100 million from Miriam Adelson,
Thank you.
and what it sounds like is that that money has paid off. Smotrix, the media was like, "We're annexing the West Bank. Donald Trump is coming into office." But I got to be honest, if they would have done that even under Joe Biden, I don't think Joe Biden would have done anything. Like that's the rub, right? The Arab vote went predominantly to either Jill Stein or to Donald Trump. Donald Trump kept saying, "I'm going to end the war," whereas Kamala Harris was running around the country saying, "Nothing is going to change under me, and I can't think of anything different that I would have done." And part of it wasn't about, do you trust Trump? It was punishing Joe Biden for presiding over a genocide. Like, and then it's like the idea that they're going out saying, "Hey, Arab community, please vote for us as we pay for, fund, give money to, get political cover for, and even pretend as if it all started on October 7th. You get people like Matthew Miller, Patel, John Kirby, who would come out, lie, and shill. And what made it so bad, if you remember during the Ukraine war, John Kirby came out crying, like literally crying on air. And then when he pointed out to him, "Hey, you realize more kids have been killed in 8 months," meaning at that point it was 8 months, in 8 months in Israel than over the entire 3 years in the Russian conflict. He's war's hell, war's war. It's amazing. And I'm saying that to back up your point that they have their priorities. In the sense of Ukraine, oh, that's a big deal. In the sense of Palestinians being slaughtered en masse, that's less of a deal. And then you can use the argument of, well, there's Hamas hiding in every trash can, so anything that you blow up is fair game. Like, it's astonishing to me. But again, is there really that radical of a difference between these people, especially on this particular issue? I don't think there is.
I don't know that there is. I even think that, I think that people tried to make the case that was kind of like, well, we've watched the Biden admin for the last year not really do anything, and that's indicative of what Kamala will or won't do, without
Uh-huh.
really taking a holistic look at, you brought up the $100 million injection into his campaign, without
Yep.
really looking at the strings attached to that, or holistically what that meant, or where that money is from, or who that man was, or who his wife is. And now they're
Mhm.
looking and saying, well, Donald Trump didn't really start any more wars. He just kind of moved the embassy. And I'm like, that was enough. And now that created a lot of the conditions and tensions that we see now. And now we're talking about $100 million injection with probably the promise that the Golan Heights will now be annexed, because that was a
Uh-huh.
big sticking point for the Adelsons, as well as parts of southern Lebanon. This is
Yeah.
very serious. And whether Trump will do it diplomatically or in a business sense, does it matter? Because less people are going to die. We're still getting to where we were going to be anyway.
But see, that's the terrifying part of this. And this is where the part where Trump comes in, that the wild card thing. So, Putin, at one point, when they asked him who did he want to win the election, he said Kamala Harris. And people thought
Yes.
he was joking. They were
No,
like, oh, well, clearly
no,
he's joking. No, he wasn't
no,
joking. His
no.
point was Donald Trump is a wild card, whereas
Yes,
Kamala Harris is predictable. And
exactly.
the last thing you want is unpredictability around nuclear weapons. And
Exactly. Thank you for that.
yeah,
Finally, because people were saying, oh, it's a troll, it's a meme. I said, that's absolutely not. Think
mm-mm,
about what Russians are like. Russians want stability. Why do you think they
right,
continuously elect the same administrations? It's not because they're making them elect it, because they love stability. They love the
right,
predictability of it. They have a long-term plan. China has a long-term plan. Iran has obviously had a long-term plan to survive the sanctions regime they've been under.
uh-huh,
These people don't want vast vacillations and changes in a new foreign policy. Russia's in complete control of the game right now in their respective field.
right.
They don't want somebody to come in and say, you know what, I'm the guy that's going to end this, when they're like, we have this under control, go away.
But see, that's the other rub to that, right? If I always say, when you play chess, trying to win a drawn game is the best way to lose it. And trying to win a lost game can be catastrophic. Russia has the whip hand. They're controlling that particular territory. Europe has no military that can contest Russia in real terms. And I remember Putin said at one point, he was like, and if America gets involved, then what? What are you going to do? We have nukes. You have nukes. There's no way to win this contest. And so I think Putin's issue is not so much that he's concerned that they would lose. His issue is that the US would do something and be so provocative that it would drag us into some kind of nuclear path where we're 30 seconds to midnight because Trump decides he wants to escalate to de-escalate and mispredicts what is going on in real terms. By the way, same thing with Iran, same thing with China, but definitely with Russia in this particular conflict, and definitely with Iran, with some of the people that they're bringing into the administration. Talk about that for a bit. How unpredictability can lead to bad outcomes. And one last point for this. I went to the Biden-Putin summit. This was when they were trying to bring down hostilities. And one of the things that Biden pointed out at that summit is, look, you guys don't understand. There was no communication going back and forth. And that no communication freaked out the Biden administration, saying we need to have some way of talking so we don't mispredict the movements that each other are doing and that we know each other's red lines. Well, you bring a wild card into that situation, and they may cross those red lines purely from hubris and provocation. Give me a take on that.
Absolutely. And exactly what we said is the stability. Martyanov, his recent book, was really great about this because it talked about America's downfall due to hubris and basically blind spots, is where we either believe, oh, these people are too primitive, these people don't engage like we do, they're not smart like we are, and that usually goes for Iran and China and sometimes Russia a little bit less so now. I think that those are the things that are going to come to bite us in the ass in the end. Those blind spots, especially when we don't fully examine the relations between, we have 3 civilizational states. So we don't even understand how they function because we are not a civilizational state. There's some arguments that people want to make that we are. I disagree. We are not. We have 3 civilizational states, which means that their foreign policy and the way that they act in international relations is different. We have never made an effort to understand why it's different. We've just said that it's inferior. Now we have this block of these 3. I wouldn't say that they're hugely formidable opponents of the United States on their own, but as a trifecta, this is enormous. And the hubris is great that you mentioned, the thought that we're going to come in and say, Putin, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. And he's just going to disregard China and Iran and say, you know what, this is what we've been waiting for to end the war in Ukraine, is just, that's so far away from where we are.
And by the way, this is after the Minsk agreements 1 and 2. This is after the Istanbul agreements. All of these things were basically cast to the side. Angela Merkel comes out and says, we tricked Putin. We lied to him. And a deal that was supposed to end the war ended up being a way to give Ukraine time to build up a military to provoke a war. Like, that stuff is outrageous. And then they would say unprovoked conflict on Ukraine. From your point of view, when you're looking at this, what is the current status of the Ukrainian military? How long can they last? They seem to be on their last leg. What's going on the battlefield?
Well, the current state is that there is a huge advancement on the Eastern Front, obviously. I mean, we're even using the same jargon as we did in World War II. This is fantastic. So the Russian forces have captured a lot of key areas in eastern Ukraine, which is Ugledar and Seledovo, which is both in Donetsk Oblast, which means that and the progression in that Oblast has been something that's been sort of a hot topic for the last 2 years. They seem to not have as much trouble in Lugansk, and then they kind of stalled out in Donetsk. So this huge push to the east in Donetsk is very significant and is being tried to play down. Interestingly enough, Zelensky was asked recently, do you need money or do you need weapons? I don't remember which European leader it was, definitely an EU leader. And he said, we are fine with money until 2026, which I don't know how that happened, but they said we need weapons now. Their recruitments are getting even more horrendous. They're kidnapping people. It's just it's out of control. And this whole, I think you might not have wanted to get into it, and we won't get too deep, but this whole narrative about the North Koreans on the border that are going to invade is probably another way to say, hey, can we get some other troops to come down here and help us? But
yeah, they have no evidence of that.
No,
I mean, they have zero evidence of that. And what's wild about it, the phone call where they were like, Putin and Trump talked on the phone, Washington Post, anonymous sources. All right, Russia comes out, Peskov, didn't happen. In fact, he went further. He was like, this shows how ridiculous Western media is. And then you even get Ukraine saying, we had nothing, we don't know anything about that conversation. Washington Post doubles down and says, well, they're lying about the North Korean soldiers, and so they may be lying about this phone call. For one, they have no evidence that the North Korean soldiers, for one, why would they need them? Why would they need them? Ukraine is the one that's out there snatching people off dance floors. Russia is like a 1 million man military at this point. Why would they need them? They're taking territory hand over fist. Ukraine doesn't seem to have the ability to stop them. So it's like, this makes no sense. This is almost like as crazy as they blew up their own pipeline. Like I don't doubt that a security agreement with North Korea may have North Korean troops there learning or getting procedures and getting familiar with like systems and whatnot. Right. But they're not on the battlefield fighting the Ukrainians. It's mind-blowing. That's all. It's just the way
it's such a fascist idea to sit here and say that North Korea is so weak that we call them a joke and all of this stuff. But North Korea is also so strong that we're terrified of their nuclear weapons, and we're terrified of the idea of them being on the front with Ukraine. Like, what would even if there were 8,000 North Korean troops, what of it? Like, what's the difference?
So what? That's the other part that I didn't quite get, right? It's like, oh, China is helping Russia. So what?
Okay.
You've given them $320 billion. How are you complaining about somebody else helping an ally? It's just weird. From your point of view, when you're looking at the special military operation, how long do you think this lasts? And how do you think this ends? Meaning, let's say, do you think, I guess the question becomes, how cynical do you think the West is on this? Is it they let Ukraine collapse even to the border of Poland? Meaning they just let it all collapse and then fight a guerrilla war after the fact for the next 10 years? Is it they come to some kind of agreement? Is it they freeze the conflict? How do you think this comes to a head, even with the Trump administration in office? Or let's say, for example, the Biden administration is in office. How do you think this comes to a head?
Ukraine's always been a frozen conflict since its inception. Since the 1950s, it's always been a frozen conflict waiting to kind of be thawed out. That's how all those hot spots are there. We've already discussed, we obviously have the uniparty. They're not totally at odds with their ideas. So the idea that Trump and Vance might say, you know what, we're not really interested in playing with Ukraine right now, but we're not going to like stop it for future like endeavors, which is kind of how they keep all of our sort of coups. What I see playing out, it's interesting in Russia. A lot of people want the whole thing now. A lot of, especially more military-minded people say, let's just keep going and finish this thing, and let's finish the job.
People in America, real quick, they don't realize that Putin is a moderate.
Yes.
Like Putin is the dove. He's the one that's been getting criticism for being too slow to respond either to the coup.
Too liberal. Yep. And I even now talk, and I won't name any, it wasn't anybody that is like a geopolitical analyst, just a civilian that I'm very close with and very politically minded said he is moderate. He's almost too moderate. And to the point where there are indications that if he were to start engaging in these sorts of negotiations for a DMZ or a rump state or anything like that, the military in Ukraine is so large or the Russian military in Ukraine is so large and so far away from the Kremlin that they would basically say, no, and just keep going. And that would be the end of it. So you are 100% accurate when you say he is the dove. He is the one holding it back from they want to keep going. They don't want to stop now. From the Russians that I spoke to one-on-one, and this goes back to the previous question of the effects of Ukraine. Look at the two populations. Russians aren't feeling any effects of the war. Most of them know somebody who maybe went. Not most of them know somebody that have died. Everybody in Ukraine knows somebody that has died. They are severely affected by this conflict. They have a larger death count and a fraction population of what Russia started out with. So that's why Russians are like, just take it all. We haven't really even what are we dealing? Why are we doing this? What are we dealing with? So you're 100% right. Putin's the one holding it back. I don't think that a DMZ is a good idea. We see what it's done to the North Korean or the Korean Peninsula. We don't want that. I mean, Russia's really great about that. Actually, when I went to Russia, I spoke at a seminar that was about basically learning from the mistakes the West has made in various areas and avoiding those mistakes. And they do it in these areas too. So I don't think that they're going to be, yeah, sure, why don't you arm the hell out of Poland and then give us a demarcated zone or a demilitarized zone inside of Ukraine? I just don't see Russia going for that.
Well, I mean, not just that, but after spending this much blood and treasure, the last thing you want to do is create a demilitarized zone. And then in the West, they start building up again, where you have to go through this all over again. I mean, that's the rub, right? How do you trust any kind of deal that is made after the last 3 agreements fell apart? It's like this issue of trust doesn't apply. The JCPOA fell apart. So it's like this level of credibility in making these kind of agreements is just not there. I mean, even this notion, we won't move an inch to the east. Okay, well, that fell apart. I mean, Ukraine was supposed to be neutral, fell apart. One China policy, where we're going to consider all Taiwan part of China, fell apart. Like, it's this rules-based system where the rules change when we decide they change. And so if you are Russia, India, China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, like if you're any of these countries, you can't trust any of the deals and agreements which inherently create a problem. How do you end this with some kind of agreement if you can't trust the party that is doing the agreement? It's almost forces you to go to the border of Poland.
Well, it does. And it goes back to we're actually just keep on going in full circle because it goes back to the blind spot again. Russia knows America doesn't understand Ukraine. They don't understand Western Ukraine, despite the CIA's involvement and despite the coups and everything. They don't understand the people that live there. They don't understand the type of rhetoric or the type of political ideology that goes on in Western Ukraine. As a fascist, very far right region, and
they know that.
To think that the Americans are going to go in there, and we know that they're not going to demilitarize it. They're exactly what you said. They're going to build it right back up.
No, my point is the CIA knows that perfectly well. I mean, in fact, we love fascists. We love Nazis. Like, if you think of Syria, for example, we were arming terrorists. We were using those terrorists as a battering ram to try to take down the Assad government. We had zero issue with the fact that they were terrorists. If you look at South America, where we were using kill squads to try to take down the Sandinista governments because those were too lefty, and we didn't like those lefty governments, so we were using these kind of fascists to go after them. Bolivia, same thing. When the Evo Morales government fell, we used fascists to go after. Like, we have zero issue using terrorists, fascists, or anybody else that would accomplish our military objectives. At least that's my point of view in it.
Well, I mean, in terms of the civilians, in terms of being able to keep what Americans would think, oh yeah, we're gonna go in there, it's gonna be much more peaceful, we're gonna be able to handle this region, yada yada yada. When really, exactly what you said will be going on is the reemployment of these sorts of fascists. Interestingly enough, though, I don't remember, I still don't know what day it is, but it was this morning or yesterday. But the Russian Nazi UN a resolution went through, which actually ties this war to the fight against neo-Nazism, which I thought was kind of interesting. Not that the United States voted for it, but that it finally passed. This is like 2 decades long, and maybe things are changing a little bit in that region, and the way people view that region, and people are getting kind of disenchanted.
Well, when you see the Ukrainian soldier at the soccer game doing what, Sieg Heil, kind of, it's kind of hard to say there are no Nazis in Ukraine after that.
I had to post that because we're looking at them telling me the Israelis can't go to Europe. And it's like, well, we've been trying to fight fascism over here in Ukraine for about 3 decades. Where have y'all been at? Like, where have you guys been?
I even remember when the Democratic Party, members of the party, sent a letter effectively saying, hey, these neo-Nazis in Ukraine are training Americans. We need to, stop this. And then the moment that the war started, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. Zelensky half Jewish. Why would there be not? Like, it becomes that nonsense. This level of propaganda that is spread across the American airwaves. It's just outrageous. Like, It's aggravating to me because it's like when you're working at a station and you're following news constantly and you're following news from around the world. So you have a perspective of news that goes beyond just the individual country. It goes into kind of a world perspective. And you know that they are lying. You just know it. And the newspapers are reporting stuff that either is not true, that either drops context, um, or that is just repeating talking points from Ukraine or, for the matter, Israel. Basically, if our allies say it, we just print it. It's the most aggravating thing in the world. I want to get to another part. The security arrangements between Russia and North Korea, Russia and Africa, like various countries in Africa, but more importantly, Russia and Iran. Because Russia and Iran are supposed to be signing a security partnership agreement. And I don't know what's in this agreement yet. Has there been any word about what's going to be in this agreement? Because that's going to be a big deal. I mean, right now, Iran is talking about True Promise 3, basically striking Israel. And so, what does that mean in the context of either Trump coming in or, for that matter, Joe Biden? And if there's a security agreement, definitely, what does that mean? And to go further, Trump gets in office. He's given $100 million by Miriam Adelson to follow through with whatever she wants him to do, basically a puppet. What happens if Iran is in a war when Trump gets in? Like, I'm fascinated by this because the reality of it is all of these major powers that are nuclear powers can get dragged into conflict in the Middle East right now as we speak within the next few months. Give me your take on this.
The agreement between Russia and Iran, the details haven't been totally released yet. What we do know is that it's going to buttress up their previous agreements that they have had and create a comprehensive strategic partnership between the two, which will strengthen the defensive ties, which is important because who's in need of defense right now? Iran. So it also this partnership will underscore a regional pivot with both countries they'll strengthen their security and defense cooperations. And they've expressed this will be a counter to Western influence. Lavrov has been very excited and vocal about this agreement. And he says that this agreement is very much a commitment to establishing regional security and stability between these two powers, which means basically we're taking charge, like no more. This is some Western analysts are seeing this as a direct response to them. I think it's more of a precaution and a routine. It'll be just like the North Korean one, which was something that's been in place for 20 years. What the new agreement makes it even more comprehensive and more defensive. Both of these agreements will probably mean not that Iran is in need of defending, but it means that Russia's almost obligated to step in for the defense of the sovereign territory of those states. So not necessarily joining Iran in a crusade against Israel or the United States, but if the territorial integrity of Iran is threatened or in a significant way, I think Russia is more, I don't say they're obligated or legally bound to, but their word binds them to the fact that they'll need to step in.
Ironically, though, Russia may be okay with the U.S. getting bogged down into a war in Iran. And the reason I say that, Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq. The U.S. couldn't swallow Iraq. I mean, if you remember, ISIS and everything else came out of that. I seriously believe that they would help militarily Iran, basically weapons, guns, bullets, intelligence, all of that stuff. I think they would give it to them to the hilt. By the same token, it would drain the U.S. resources to even try to do something like that against and towards Iran. And again, I am greatly concerned. Like, give me a take on this. So Donald Trump is bringing in a bunch of neocons. He's bringing in Marco Rubio. He's bringing in some of these, the Secretary of Defense is utterly insane. He's a TV guy who wanted to bomb Russia, who wanted to go after Iran, basically bomb pretty much anything. So security partnership agreement is signed. Iran hits Israel. Iran threatens the integrity of Israel from the attack that they do. The U.S. now gets involved. Israel tries to do a strike on Iran, and the U.S. joins in. This is 4 nuclear powers or 3 nuclear powers involved in a conflict, right?
Correct. I think the part that is the most crucial, the part that where I get hung up on is, will America really join in with an Israeli strike on Iran, or will they? Because you mentioned Iraq,
Yeah,
important, because not that Israel forced us to go into Iraq, but they kind of poked us along after they saw, oh, maybe they will invade Iraq. They said, okay,
no.
let's encourage this. That's a whole different beast than Iran.
And Netanyahu
Israelis are
wants it.
yeah,
Everybody believes he
Israelis are
wants it.
irrational enough that they have psyoped themselves into thinking that this is going to be some sort of even-keeled war, or that it won't
Mhm.
escalate into some sort of like global consuming conflict. But I think that the United States is rational enough in all of our irrationality to know that that is highly potential if Israel goes ballistic inside of the borders of Iran. So
I
that's the
don't
part
know.
that gets me. How much damage has Ansarallah really done to our Navy that made us kind of shy away and with our tail between our legs without really saying a word? And now what is really holding Israel back from going full blown on Iran? It's probably us saying, we don't know if we can really join in on that. Like, I don't know if we're really militarily capable, because that is a ground war
Yeah.
into a state that has a volunteer force of over 7 million.
Wow.
That's unheard of. Like, they have their own forces, and then they open it up to a volunteer force of people that have been previously trained, and they received over 7 million volunteers. We're not invading Iran. Sorry, Israel. We physically can't. So that's the part, that's the one thing, like, we get all the way up to that, and then
Yeah.
it's like, who goes into Iran for Israel? Because Israel can't invade Iran alone.
So, if anything, it's probably going to be an air campaign. It would have to be an air campaign because Israel has no route in order to
Right.
invade Iran,
Yeah.
and it only has 8 million people. In regards to the entire country, Iran is a country of 90 million people, nearly 100 million people in the country.
Mhm.
So, Iran has pointed out before, we have been preparing for America. Israel is not a challenge for us. Basically saying, look, we have been preparing for America all of these years after they invaded Iraq. Your tiny little country, we can decimate. And we've demonstrated that we can decimate it by your air defense being incapable of stopping our missiles when we decide to hit you, which is possible that that's the thing that's holding Israel back.
That's what I was just
Meaning,
going to say. We
yeah,
don't even
it may
talk
be,
about their air defense systems. They have Russian air defense systems now. So if
yeah.
NATO can't get into Ukraine and do any game changing in there, what the hell makes you think that we're gonna be able to fly over Iran and do it there? It's
And
crazy.
that's the other part. Because if you remember, some of the reporting that came out was that Iran wanted to do 3 major strikes. Went through the first one, they encountered unknown air defense, in
Mhm.
which case they had to call off the last 2 strikes. And you can watch the video of the air defense knocking stuff out the sky. It's astonishing. You can literally see the stuff getting hit. Yeah, man, this is deeply disconcerting to me because
Why aren't we talking about
neocons,
they've studied our Patriot systems. They've studied our drone systems. They have the
yeah,
best drone program in the world. They don't even have aircraft carriers because they said, forget that. We're just going to make drone craft carriers. So they just have
yeah,
carriers that carry drones. These people are militarily very advanced. I don't know if they're further advanced than us, but they are very advanced. And again, blind spots or the hubris. Those
yeah,
stupid versions could never do what we could do.
yeah,
Meanwhile,
yeah. I mean, they said the same thing about Russia, though, right? Russia's a gas can masquerading as a country. We're going to destroy the economy. We're going to destroy the Russian military. None of that happened. Like, this is all hubris. This is all just them looking in the mirror with an inflated sense of their importance and their capabilities. And that stuff is getting shown exponentially, meaning it's almost like you could see the empire fading on some level. They tried to overthrow Syria, it didn't work. They lost Afghanistan, so that's gone. Vietnam was a canary in the coal mine, in which case they lost. I would argue Ukraine is the canary in the coal mine for a new world. And the reason I say that is NATO tried to flex its capabilities and powers and lost.
Mhm.
And not just lost badly. And while they were losing, you had countries like Iran, North Korea. They were effectively isolated that are no longer isolated. They've been integrated into this alternate world economy from the standpoint of the global South, Africa, etc. And so it's like Europe that makes up 15% of the globe is now almost an island to itself, with the US being the head of it, with its vassals basically deindustrializing itself
Exactly.
in order to fight this war. It is very bizarre. When you hear Annalena Baerbock come out and say, I don't care what Germans want, we're going to fight this war, and then gives the speech where she's like, yeah, we had to take money from trains and public services in order to give to Ukraine. And I think to myself, what the hell are Germans thinking?
Mhm.
Like when they hear one of their leaders say that, they have to, their head has to explode. I mean, knowing full well that the US blew up Nord Stream and they're blaming it on the Ukrainians while simultaneously continually giving Ukraine money. Like, it's astonishing that Europe has gotten to this point. Do you think that if Trump pulls out, that Europe is going to be left with the bag? And do you think Europe can even carry this bag?
I think they're obligated to. That's like the terrifying part is we're looking at elites that are basically saying in the West, I don't care what the little people say. We're doing what we want. And in the East, they're saying, what's going on with the little people and how do we kind of make this work for them? Because you talked about the Russia African summit, China, and all of that. I don't know that Trump's crazy war cabinet will allow him to leave Europe with the bag completely. No, they cannot handle that bag. That's the terrifying part. I mean, as much as we want to like pretend like we don't like them or they're annoying little brothers, we can't survive without the EU. Not as much as they can't survive without us, but we can't survive without the EU. So this idea that Trump's gonna be like, forget you, NATO, especially when his last sticking point was everybody needs to spend 2%. Well, everybody's achieved that and now gone beyond it. So his requirements have been satisfied. For him to leave them holding the bag, I just don't think that that's an option anymore. Do you? I don't see that. As with all of the business interests, the military industrial complex interests, the money laundering interests, even just the Democrats' interests. Who's going to let him completely pull out of Ukraine and leave it with Europe to collapse? Only people left holding anything are the French and the Germans, and they're on their last legs.
But see, that's the rub. From Trump's point of view, this is Joe Biden's war.
Yes.
Like Joe Biden, like Trump, over the course of the election campaign, this was something they fought over. Like when Kamala Harris was like, Trump is going to allow Ukraine to collapse. He's going to give it to Putin. And Trump talks to dictators like Kim Jong-un. And you get J.D. Vance effectively saying, look, negotiation is not a bad thing. Okay, well, that's a mind-blowing concept, even though it's perfectly true. And Trump keeps saying, I'm going to end the war. I'm going to end the war. Now, there's talk that they're going to get one last cash infusion, and that's going to be the end of it. And even in the conversations with Zelensky, he seems like he's hell-bent on doing it. So I honestly don't know. I mean, I get the sense that Trump wants to make a deal. And the catch becomes, okay, well, the only deal you're going to be able to make is on Putin's terms.
Yep.
Now, whether Trump is going to be able to accept that or not, I don't know. I hope he does, because I hope he realizes you have no capability of changing the context of this war short of introducing nuclear weapons. And God knows, I hope that's not the direction he decides to go. Like, that's what I mean, the wild card stuff. I believe Harris would have kept the war going on. But even her, I got to be honest, I don't even know what she would do. I mean, she has zero foreign policy experience. I get the sense that she's going to keep the war going on just like Joe Biden. But truth be told, if she has Hillary Clinton and people like Hillary Clinton in her ear, well, that's just as bad as the cabinet that Donald Trump has. Like, Hillary Clinton is a war hawk. I mean, so is Anthony Blinken, a war hawk, John Kirby. Like, all of these people are utterly insane. And so is there really a dramatic difference between these psychopaths versus the lunatics that Trump is bringing on? I don't think there is. I'm saying that honestly. Joe Biden terrified me during this term, because truth be told, if Joe Biden would have made one decision to allow weapons to be fired into Russia, we would have been at war with Russia right now. That is just one decision. And that was a decision that many of those countries were agitating for. It only took one, conniption fit for Joe Biden, one bad morning was like, yeah, screw it. And we would have been at war. That's what I mean. I don't like the fact that we are one decision away from oblivion. That's terrifying. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But like you said, Europe can't carry it by themselves. And I got to imagine that they have to be thinking at this point, what was it all for? What was it all for? Hundreds of thousands of lives, loss of territory, only for 3 years for the president to say, we're with you for as long as it takes. And then a new president comes in and it's like, all right, we're going to end this. It's such a waste. It's such a waste.
I also think that that's important. That would have a humongous effect on just public sentiment. What a waste, 1 million Ukrainian lives to lose and countless American dollars, and then to just have nothing to show for it except a destroyed and Russian Ukraine and a rearmed Poland, a broken Germany, and an embarrassed France. It's very sad. This war was necessary. I think Putin was right to force them to show their hands, but that's why it can't be kind of ended with a whimper because of how necessary and important this war was. We can't allow, this is my own maybe not rational thought, but we can't allow those Ukrainians to have died in vain and not usher in something better than put them up to that. We need to bring something better in.
Sunken cost fallacy. This idea, like if you're at Vegas, you lose $100. Well, I got to keep playing because I got to get my money back. That type of thing. I mean, yeah, maybe. But see, I don't think this war needed to be fought. I mean, truth be told, the U.S. government